Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Monsters of the Mind. As always, I'm your host, Mr.G. So, the ocean, harbinger of life itself, and in mythology, home to some of the most deadly creatures who have ever existed. Jormungandr, the snake that wrapped around the world and has a rivalry with Thor the god. Leviathan of the Bible, said to be one of the deadliest creatures ever created. And so much more. But the ocean, according to mythology, is also home to a race of human people. That's right, today we're talking about merfolk. Well, I'm just going to be calling them mermaids since that's really the term that people tend to use anyway, so that's just what I'll be saying, okay? Okay. In folklore, mermaids are said to resemble creatures that on top are human, but on the bottom they're a fish. Nearly every culture that's near the sea, or really any large body of water, has stories about mermaids or other aquatic humanoids. In Greek mythology, for example, Poseidon's son Triton was depicted almost exactly like a merman, and sometimes in modern art Poseidon himself is drawn as a merman, but that's not how he was drawn in folklore. Plus, remember, he was not born god of the sea, he was only assigned that role, so why would he be a merman? And anyway, Greek mythology also had the Nereids, who were basically marine nymphs, though they didn't have fish tails. There were 50 of them, and Poseidon married one named Amphitrite. Over in Ireland, you have tales of the Marrow, which are creatures very similar in appearance to mermaids. They were known to be very alluring, and they would even trap human souls for company. Also, they have a red cap that they need to be able to use to travel the depths of the ocean. And while the females are very beautiful, it's said that males are incredibly monstrous and disgusting. So these guys were the ones who made the monstrous male supermodel female trope for monsters. Thanks a lot, guys! Anyway, sticking to the UK, we find selkies, which are said to be shapeshifters capable of shifting into a seal by wearing its skin. And now, you might be wondering, what about sirens? Well, first off, I already made a video about sirens, and as I said in that video, sirens are supposed to be half bird, not half fish. But eventually, probably because of translation issues, eventually sirens kind of became synonymous with mermaids. So, yeah, that happened. For a more modern example of amphibious people, there's the gillman, popularized by the creature from the Black Lagoon. Most of the time, these guys look like a humanoid frog fish thing. Mermaids became really popular during medieval times, as sailors would constantly talk about seeing creatures that they swore were humans, but they lived in the ocean. So what's going on here? Are mermaids a real thing? Why are all these stories a thing? The most common explanation for why people thought they saw mermaids is the result of the sea cow, dugongs. Dugongs, if you look at the top of them, look remarkably similar to mermaids. What likely happened is that sailors probably saw the top of dugongs or manatees and not knowing what they were, mentally filled in the gaps and assumed they must be the mythical mermaid. Mermaids never stopped being popular, though, and they ended up getting a further boost in popularity by Danish author Hans Christian Andersen's short story The Little Mermaid. In the story, mermaids are said to have very long lifespans, but they lack souls. Instead, when they die, they just turn to sea foam. And then they just cease to exist? That's a horrifying thought. Ugh. One mermaid, however, isn't happy with this, especially after she becomes enamored with a human, so she makes a deal with a sea witch to get a pair of legs in order to both be with him and potentially gain a soul. Unfortunately, the prince falls for another, and when she's given the chance to become a mermaid again, she refuses since it would require killing the prince. So she accepts her fate and turns into sea foam. But her brief stint as a human and her selfless action caused something interesting to happen. She became reborn as an air spirit, where she's told that if she does good deeds for a few hundred years, she'll gain a soul and be allowed into heaven. Since the publication of the story, and especially after the massively successful Disney adaptation, mermaids have been even more popular than they were before, and even to this day people are obsessed with mermaids. But why? Why do we like them? That's a good question, and truthfully, I don't really have any good answers to it. But if you have any theories, I'd like to know. But when talking about mermaids, we have the big question. What are they? Are they fish, or are they mammals? After all, they're almost always shown breathing underwater, but they have hair, and presumably nipples, since they're always shown wearing bras. So, what are they? What would you classify them as? Some works try to go one way or the other by making them like air breathers like cetaceans, or leaning fully into the fish aspect and making them just humanoid-looking fish. But really, doesn't matter what mermaids are. A lot of fantasy creatures wouldn't work in real life. No vertebrae has more than 4 limbs, so European dragons couldn't work, and fire breathing is a whole other issue entirely. Most giant monsters, as drawn, would violate the square cube law and collapse under their own weight. Aliens probably aren't just humans but blue. And skeletons shouldn't be able to do anything since they have literally no muscle mass, so they'd just fall apart immediately. It's fantasy, and expecting scientific accuracy from fantasy is just plain silly. So yeah, that's mermaids for you. No one knows why we like them so much, and in fact, some people even to this day are convinced they're real. But regardless, I've been Mr. G, and that's that pop culture? No. Mermaids are way too common, so, no. Goodbye.